Welcome, everybody. It is great to be here, great to have you all here. Today, I am delighted to say we're going to be talking about corporate biodiversity reporting, the path toward net positive or nature positive for businesses. Now, just some housekeeping first of all. This is being recorded and a recording will be made available. If you've got any questions, please do put them into the question box as we're running through the presentation. We're going to have about 20 minutes of presentation, then we'll have some time after that for a Q&A session. So we'll pick up questions at that point. Please do write your questions in. And the presentation is available as a PDF in the handout box. So you'll be able to download it and access the slides as well. Okay, so let's get going. My name's Tom Butterworth. I sit within the UK and I look after our ecology team within WSP in the UK here. We have a couple of hundred ecologists working across a whole range of disciplines within the UK, from terrestrial, aquatic, marine ecologists, but also covering biodiversity assessments and natural capital, and biodiversity net gain, some of which we'll touch on today. But today we're talking about corporate biodiversity reporting, and I'm delighted to be joined by Margot Greenen. Margot, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. My name is Margot. I'm a graduate consultant within the natural capital team at WSP, and I've been working with Tom on the nature positive work for about 6 months now, and I'm really excited to share what we've done so far with you all.
Great, thank you. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll give you a sort of heads up of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll get into the detail. So first of all, I'm going to give a little bit of context on nature positive and what that might mean, or what's shaping the agenda here. Then we're going to get into some of the feedback we've had from businesses on what nature positive could mean for businesses. And then we'll talk about some of the next steps, both for WSP and I think for the businesses in general. So first of all, some context, and I think this is, we could spend the whole 20 minutes talking about this context because there's an awful lot of work going on nature positive at the moment. We've got naturepositive.org that's been set up defining what nature positive means. We've also got organisations like the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. We've got UK governments through the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. We've got the World Economic Forum and the Council for Sustainable Business, all setting out what nature positive might mean. And all of them broadly saying that nature positive is about delivering gains for biodiversity, turning round our loss of biodiversity and nature and shifting that into a positive outcome. Now, this has been supported by a whole range of good initiatives like Businesses for Nature, Get Nature Positive, and underpinning all of that, or running behind all of that, we've also got this COP15. So this is the Nature COP that's going to be held in China. Many of you will be already aware of this. It's been delayed a couple of years because of the pandemic, but that Nature COP is going to set a whole load of targets that governments will sign up to, and then they'll be translated into policy, strategy, and so on within the relevant country. Now, the important point here is that one of these targets, target 15, sets out something that's new and different from any of the targets that nature COPs have set out before, which is a target that's related specifically to businesses. And it says at the moment that all businesses and financial institutions will assess their impacts on biodiversity, decrease the negative impacts and increase the positive impacts. Now, the text is red and black and bold and so on in this example because that text is still being worked on. But it is incredibly likely now that we will see a target that's focused on ensuring that businesses report and deliver positive outcomes for biodiversity. And this is tied together with the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure and the Science-Based Targets for Nature, all mirroring the approach that we've taken for climate, but accelerated for biodiversity and nature. So that's really driving forward a lot of shift within the industry, and a lot of businesses saying, yes, we want to be nature positive, which is really, really good to see. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Margot. We ran a survey last year with an organisation called Bright Blue, and one of the things that was interesting that came out of this was a survey of people across the UK, so the general public across the UK. And you can have a look at this information. We'll send around some of the links afterwards, but you can have a look at this information in the detailed report on our website. But one of the pieces was recognizing that the general public feel that charities and voluntary groups do an awful lot for nature. And then you can see that staggering down to private businesses being right at the bottom of that. And this is really important because whether that's true or not, that's certainly the perception that people have. Businesses are doing the least for nature in our public realm here, in our social realm. And having said that, was increasing recognition that businesses are both having a significant impact on nature, but also absolutely dependent on nature, whether it be reports from the UK government like the Dasgupta Review or international reports from the World Economic Forum, recognizing that nature underpins our businesses. So we've got a real challenge, I think, for businesses to both communicate what we're doing, but also up our game and really deliver benefits for biodiversity. Now, as part of that, and let's move on to the next slide, please. As part of that, what we've been doing is working to both set up and then work with the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum, which is a business-to-business forum looking at this issue of how do businesses take account of biodiversity, how do we take account of nature and result in a positive outcome. And we've been working with that forum to develop an approach that we want to take for businesses to really be certain that we are nature positive. And we're on a journey, those businesses are on a journey to become nature positive. Now, as part of that, we ran a survey, and that survey was for businesses to give us an idea of what nature positive means for them. And this is at the point where I'm going to pass over to Margot to give you an overview of some of the results we got from that survey. Margot, over to you.
Great, thanks, Tom. So yeah, we shared this survey called Nature Positive for Business with our wider group, and we received about 38 responses from various businesses. So these spanned a diversity of sectors, including energy, housing, construction, luxury and beauty, minerals, manufacturing, as well as a range of sizes, which was great to see. So we had businesses with over 30,000 employees, but also quite a good proportion of businesses with under 50 employees as well. And also, as expected, job roles focusing in kind of the sustainability and environmental and social governance roles, often in kind of senior management roles. So I'm going to go through kind of the 6 main results that we got through this survey. The first of which actually doesn't relate directly to nature, but to carbon. So most businesses have made a carbon commitment in the last couple of years. So the 36 out of the 38 respondents have made a net zero carbon commitment, and it's reported either internally and or externally. And 75% of these businesses have made this commitment in either 2020 or 2021. So it is a still relatively recent phenomenon to be incorporating, as Tom said, about all of these global movements around the environment and carbon in this case, towards specific commitments within business. And this can be explained by the fact that it is one of the first movements, if not the first movement of its type. And it's a great thing to see because it's really paving the way for nature positive going forward, being able to use all the structures that already exist for climate to hopefully springboard us and move along quicker than has happened in the past. Over half of businesses have also already signed up to a nature-related pledge. What's really interesting is that the majority of these businesses have signed up to get nature positive and or the Business for Nature call to action. So these are really focused on the idea and the concept of nature positive compared to the broader UN CBD action agenda or more specific commitments and frameworks like the New York Deforestation Declaration. So there's really an appetite for businesses to get involved in nature positive and specifically in the nature positive movement. Over 60% of respondents have also made a nature positive commitment or a biodiversity commitment. And of the 40% that have not set up commitments yet, about half of them are already planning to do so. So there really is a push to set up nature related commitments within the business sector. As we expected, there's a really diverse degree of enterprise in this sphere. So we saw that there were some businesses that were spearheading this work and that were more advanced in the delivery of their commitments, while others were more cautiously letting other businesses and initiatives pave the way. It was also interesting to see that the number of businesses with commitments matched the number of businesses with specific targets relatively closely, which suggests that commitments are likely developed alongside targets. And that's a very good indicator of a business's legitimate intent to not only talk about their goals and share their goals, but also deliver on those goals with actionable work. We also asked businesses about the characteristics of these targets that they have set. And one of the questions we asked them is about whether they set SMART targets. So these are targets that are defined as specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And although it was great to see that most businesses ticked all of those characteristics for their targets, measurable and achievable were selected the least, which might reflect the fact that biodiversity is particularly challenging and complex to measure compared to carbon, which is usually kind of one a dimension that includes more kind of a quantifiable target, whereas biodiversity really includes links and interconnectedness between ecosystems and species and is much more context specific. We also asked companies about how they, which targets covered which parts of their value chain. And as expected, we saw a lot of them covering direct impacts since they are most often easier to tackle and more straightforward to measure. But it was also great to see that some businesses are spearheading work in other areas, including the supply chain, indirect impacts, and services. And following on with this discussion about targets, there's an important need to measure the targets and report on them. And it was interesting to see that most businesses use biodiversity net gain and area-based measurement approaches to measure up against their targets. So biodiversity net gain, as you can see from this word cloud, there's DEFRA, BNG, biodiversity calculator, all mentioned here. And it is a specific framework and standardized approach that was developed by DEFRA and nationally for England, along with the biodiversity metric that is now version 3.1. But this really shows that the use of simple, well-established, easy to understand, and easy to measure measurements are very important in favoring widespread adoption and in encouraging businesses to be confident in the measurements that they use, and will likely be crucial in the development of the nature positive movement going forward. But this word cloud also shows that there's a relatively limited range of indicators that are being used, despite the fact that there's a growing number of measurements that do exist. So you have species specific like STAR, IBAT, which is more, which considers other elements as well. Nature capital assessment tools that not only look at biodiversity, but look at nature and the services it can provide more widely. That do exist and are becoming much more relevant to businesses specifically, but businesses aren't mentioning them. So there really is a knowledge gap here with businesses, or perhaps a confidence gap where businesses are not willing to adopt these other approaches as much. And following on from this point, a large minority of businesses are actually unaware of guidance more generally that is present in the nature positive sphere. So as you can see on the graph on the right, a lot of businesses, so everything you can see here in black, are unaware of the various guidance that are depicted below. It was great to see that over 80% of respondents were aware of some of the more successfully advertised approaches, so science-based targets for nature, task force for nature-related financial disclosures, the natural capital protocol, and the aforementioned biodiversity net gain good practice principles. But a lot of the other targets that, measurement approaches that aren't known as well aren't really appreciated by the business sector, it seems. It was also great to see that businesses found these guidance approaches largely very helpful or somewhat helpful and rarely unhelpful, though there is still room to be improved, with a lot of businesses, respondents saying that they would like to see more sector-specific guidance, benefits from training, benefits from guidance being made more accessible, as can become clear here, as well as a better clarity of intention and kind of boundaries between different documents around what they do and what they don't do. So there is work to do, but it's definitely work that can be accomplished and can help businesses drive their work forward. And the final point I would like to bring up is that we presented the businesses with a range of principles that we believed would be important to become nature positive. So these included core elements, core principles that we can call them. So things like applying the mitigation hierarchy, applying the precautionary approach, ensuring long-term outcomes for biodiversity and ecosystem function, and making sure actions were additional. But also more kind of process-based and target-based principles, like having smart targets, applying a standardized process through all stages of value chain, building on and meshing with existing initiatives and guidance materials. So really a range of principles here. And it was very encouraging to see that most businesses saw that these principles were extremely important or very important, and none saw them as not important, and only like one or two often ever saw them as not very important. I would also like to particularly highlight that businesses supported the use of nature-based solutions in their commitments, with 36 of the 38 businesses mentioning nature-based solutions in the responses. And over half saw nature-based solutions as being core to their strategy, or at least one of the first actions for options for actions. Excuse me. And there was also particular support for a ratcheted commitment system. So this is similar to what we have already seen for climate, which incorporates basically using nature positive commitments and targets that are more simple to deliver at first, and then periodically increasing their ambition and extent over time with regular reporting. But overall, we can say that there really is a desire for unified and collaborative work around the natural environment, especially under kind of the umbrella of the concept of nature positive. And this leads on well to our next point, which I'll hand back to Tom for.
Thank you, Margot. So where are we heading from here? Off the back of all of that work and the research that we've done to gather views from businesses and from the general public, what we're doing now is we are working with the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum and with others internationally to set out what nature positive actually means. So it's not just a name that we can slap onto something, but so that it actually has some meaning. And there it needs to link directly to those principles that Margot's just been outlining, the measurable baseline, the time frame, the smart targets, the clear actions, regular monitoring, but also links to the need to ratcheting up your ambitions. You might start with the low-hanging fruit and then move to the more challenging ambitions over time. Linking up and joining up with the Task Force for Nature's related financial disclosure and further science-based targets for nature, so that we're meeting the requirements that are going to come through from that. And looking at each part of the business, the direct impacts, biodiversity net gain plays a really good part of that story. Then widening that out to indirect, or the supply chain, or the services that are provided. And each different business, we're not going to set targets and say every business has to meet these targets, but rather each business can set their own targets that are appropriate for that business, allowing any business to step forward and say, actually, it's the supply chain that's most important for us, or it's the direct impacts, so that we can start to understand and build that understanding across a range of businesses through the forum. If we move on to the next slide, please. That leads us to where WSP sits within all of this. So we are really keen and really happy to be part of that forum and starting to build this momentum across businesses. And we would invite anybody, any businesses to come and join us. Not necessarily to have to make a commitment and say, yes, we will ratchet up our ambition, but just to learn from what we're doing from one another. Within WSP, we have some really strong, clear targets on carbon. They're set out in our most recent Global Strategic Action Plan, which runs 2022 to 2024. But we've got those targets both for 2024 and then also for 2030. We've also got a target that says that we're going to have 50% of our revenues, more than 50% of our revenues, from having a positive impact on the environment. So not just no negative impact, but having a positive impact on the environment and supporting the UN sustainability goals. Now, that's a really important first step. And our work for nature is going to become a core part of that. We're going to use our work for nature positive to actually help us meet our climate goals and these goals, the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Alongside that, we want to work with all our clients to share this learning. So we're bringing together our expertise on biodiversity net gain with our understanding of supply chains and the expertise we've got from carbon and understanding on carbon assessments, and building on that to understand what this might mean for nature, what this might mean for businesses considering nature. And so we've got a really interesting journey there, both for ourselves and for the clients that we work with. Next slide, please. And this really is about bringing together a whole load of pieces that join up under our banner of Future Ready, understanding the trends that we've got going forward and really designing and creating places that take into account those trends, whether it be making sure that we're nature positive or moving towards a circular economy, creating livable and healthy places, that climate resilience, as well as dealing with carbon emissions and net zero. So bringing that all together under that banner of Future Ready allows us to hopefully start to address nature positive in an integrated way. So thank you very much. Let's move on to the very last slide and we can open up for questions.
Thank you, Tom and Margot, for your presentation. Fantastic presentation. So before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform. And also you can download the PDF version of this presentation from the handout box on the dashboard. So we received some great questions from people who register. I will start with those. How can we provide meaning to stakeholders who may consider this another form of greenwashing?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Shall I kick that off, Margot, and then you can add anything you'd like? But it's a really, really important point, and that's why we want to work in the way that we've set out here, that we want to set these principles and then build a journey for nature positive for any business, and commit to being nature positive and reporting back across those businesses and perhaps within the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum. Because what's really crucial is that we're not just paying a third party to plant some trees somewhere else and then ignoring our impacts. We need to report on each part of our supply chain and understand those impacts, run materiality assessments so that we can understand how biodiversity is influencing the business and how the business is influencing biodiversity properly. We have got some really good examples that we can use from the Natural Capital Protocol, from the work on climate change, that means that we can go beyond just paying a third party to do something nice and telling a good story, and really understanding those baseline impacts, baseline dependencies, and then building a nature positive story off the back of that. So yeah, really crucial. That's why we want this transparent reporting against each of these principles, and we want to see us starting to move along that nature positive journey.
I completely agree. And I would just add that by meshing with other initiatives that are starting up, so the Science-Based Targets for Nature, the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which are themselves also trying to combat greenwashing and really create a transparent and effective way for businesses to report on and understand their impacts on nature and how to improve them. It's by cooperating with these various movements that we'll be able also to avoid greenwashing going further.
Thank you. To what extent can we learn from existing approaches within the development sector? Can there be a standardized method for all?
Yeah, okay, really good question. We are not looking to redefine a whole load of new guidance, create a whole load of new metrics and so on. What we want to do with this approach to nature positive is build off the back of the great work that's already done, whether it be the great information in Get Nature Positive or the biodiversity net gain approach that's been developed, and build off the back of that to enhance and enable businesses to commit to nature positive. This means that there will not be one size that fits all. That's inevitable. We are going to see small businesses with a very different footprint and very different way of influencing their impacts on biodiversity than large infrastructure organizations. The smaller business may well be focused on shifting their supply chain, whereas some of the businesses, large landowners, it may be about their direct impacts that's crucial. And so we're not going to see one size fits all. But what we do want to see is transparency about where we understand the impacts are, how we're addressing those, and reporting on those improvements that we make. So yes, we can definitely learn from climate, from the sustainable development work, from all of that, and we're going to build on all of that, but it's not going to be one size fits all.
Thank you. Next question is, how adequate do you consider the current indicators and metrics for measuring against nature positive targets? Are there any leaders?
So what's interesting is that there's an awful lot of commitments without any requirement on reporting or specific metrics. Now, where we have those specific metrics, I think some of them can be really, really positive. I think the biodiversity net gain work, both internationally and within the UK, is a really good step. It doesn't take into account everything, and this is part of why we need to expand our thinking for nature positive to go beyond those direct impacts that biodiversity net gain generally takes account of. But that's a good example of a metric and an approach that absolutely can be used and embedded in a nature positive approach. But nature positive needs to be broader than that. It does need to think about supply chains. We do need to think about the knock-on effects downstream in our value chain. And we do need to think about how this plays out for society as well. So yes, there are lots of metrics out there and we should be using those. But what we need to do, I guess is a repeat of the last point, is be really clear about what metrics we're using, be transparent about that, report on that, and make sure that we really are delivering something additional. Come back to these principles about what good looks like. Margot, do you want to add anything to that? Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I really do. Thanks. To add on to that, there are great sources of information about that really bring together all different types of guidance for different parts of the supply of the value chain for different types of businesses in some cases. Those include, for example, the IUCN guidelines for corporate biodiversity reporting, I believe. And those are great sources of information that really have so much information, if not too much information for one person to really get through. But I think one of the main barriers to actually properly answering your question about giving you a specific answer around which indicators to use is that they aren't being used enough by businesses at the moment. So it's hard to know which ones will work best. So there really is a need to promote the use of these measurements to promote to be able to understand them, to be able to improve them, and in a similar way to what has been done for the biodiversity metric 3.0 in the UK, to really be able to set some sort of not necessarily a standard metric that everybody must use, but really a core set of standards that and best practice principles and examples that businesses would be able to follow and be confident with, I think is also really, really important.
Thank you. Next question is, how do you incentivize businesses to report and engage in nature positive in the absence of legislation and regulation?
That's a lovely question. Yeah, really good question. What we're finding is that increasingly businesses are recognizing that this is important. So I would put it the other way around. I would say that if a business isn't taking into account its impact on the environment and impact on nature, then there could well be a very significant risk to that business that's being ignored, that's just being put as an externality in their assessments. So I think the first piece is to understand the risks that losing nature or having a negative impact on nature will have for that business. Because the first thing to do is minimize that risk. And personally, I have not found a business yet that doesn't have a link with nature and doesn't have some level of risk associated with that. So that's the first step. The second is, if you then start looking at what positively you might do to avoid those risks and remove those risks to the business, then we can start to actually deliver win-wins. We might have ambitions around net zero carbon, or making sure that we've got health and well-being benefits for the local community we're working nearby, or not impacting negatively on the water catchment that we're working in. using nature, coming back to the point about nature-based solutions and enhancing nature, can actually be a really, really powerful way of getting those win-wins as well. So we've got those two sides. The first step, let's identify those risks and remove them. And secondly, let's find some opportunities to see some enhancement. So I think if we did that, that would actually address a lot of these companies that are saying, well, we can just ignore it, and actually open that up to it's an opportunity for improving the way that business works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And although it's not necessarily incentivization in the way that, you know, you have a company that has to have a reporting requirement because of national or national policy, basically, there is potential to make it really easy for them, or much easier at least. So that's really where things like following up on what has already been done in terms of carbon commitments, potentially following the Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 format that has already been established there, is where that's going to really kick in and help the nature positive movement to become not such a large insurmountable steps for most businesses. And also seeing you know, other businesses do work in nature positive, and seeing so many initiatives around it does influence someone's you know, desire to participate in what is happening globally in this realm.
And becoming part of something like the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum, there's similar ones in most countries, means that you can then you don't have to commit to a nature positive outcome, but it means you can learn lessons from those around the table around what's working and what's not working, and I think that's incredibly valuable.
Fantastic, thank you. We have several more questions that unfortunately we don't have time to answer them during the Q&A now. These will be answered directly via email. So thank you for all these wonderful questions. And thank you, Tom and Margot, for this presentation. So please feel free to follow up directly with the presenters via the contact details shown on the screen. And I would like to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you for your time. We look to see you in future webinars.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.